It's okay, look at me. Try to breathe slowly, in and out. That's it, stay with me.
I said move. Do you understand the consequences of this?
I understand perfectly, and I will not move.
You're fired. And if you ever interrupt me again in front of my guests, I'll make sure you never work in this city. Richard Hale's voice cut through the ballroom so sharply that even the string quartet near the marble staircase stopped playing mid-note. The room fell silent except for the soft clink of crystal glasses and the distant thunder rolling outside the floor-to-ceiling windows. Maya Brooks stood frozen beside the long dining table, one hand still hovering protectively near 8-year-old Noah Hale. The boy's tiny fingers trembled against the sleeve of her cleaning uniform, while wealthy investors and socialites stared at her like she had committed some unforgivable crime. Maya swallowed carefully, her heartbeat pounding hard against her ribs. "Sir," she said quietly, trying to keep her voice steady. "Noah's having trouble breathing." Richard barely looked at his son. His sharp blue eyes stayed locked on Maya instead, cold and irritated beneath the glow of the chandelier lights. "My son is fine," he snapped. "What's not fine is a maid embarrassing me during a $12 million charity dinner." A few guests exchanged uncomfortable glances. One woman lowered her champagne glass slowly while another leaned toward her husband and whispered something behind her hand. Maya could feel every eye in the room pressing down on her shoulders, reminding her exactly where she stood in this house. Staff were supposed to stay invisible, quiet, replace glasses, clear plates, smile politely, and disappear. But Noah's breathing had changed. She noticed it 10 minutes earlier when she carried in the dessert trays. The little boy's cheeks had gone pale. His voice sounded strained when he whispered, "Miss Maya, my throat hurts." She had seen symptoms like that before while helping care for her mother during long nights at the county hospital. Tight throat, shallow breaths, watery eyes, panic hiding beneath confusion. Maya glanced down now and saw Noah scratching weakly at the collar of his tiny navy suit. His breathing sounded thinner than before. "Faster. Sir, please," she said again, softer this time. "I think he's having an allergic reaction." Richard let out a short laugh without humor. To what? The air. A few nervous chuckles scattered across the ballroom, but they died quickly when Noah suddenly coughed hard into his fist. The sound echoed across the polished room. Maya crouched beside him instantly. "Noah," she whispered. The boy looked at her with frightened, glassy eyes. "It hurts," he rasped. Maya's stomach tightened. She looked toward Richard again. "Does he carry an EpiPen?" Richard's jaw hardened immediately. "That's enough." His voice turned dangerously calm now, the kind that made the entire household nervous. "Security." Two men near the entrance straightened at once. Maya slowly rose to her feet as the guards approached her from across the ballroom. Rain slammed harder against the giant windows overlooking the dark cliffs beyond the estate. Somewhere above them, thunder cracked again. Noah coughed once more, sharper this time, and suddenly the crystal water glass slipped from his tiny hand and shattered against the marble floor. The sharp crash of glass seemed to wake the entire ballroom at once. Guests jumped back from the table as water spread across the polished marble floor beneath Noah's chair. The little boy gripped the edge of the tablecloth with tiny shaking hands, his breathing turning rough and uneven. Maya moved toward him instinctively, but one of the security guards stepped between them. "Sir asked you to leave," the man said quietly, almost apologetic. Maya looked past him. Noah's face was changing color now, the healthy warmth draining from his skin beneath the golden chandelier light. "He needs help now," Maya said firmly. Richard Hale straightened near the center of the room, his tuxedo jacket perfectly pressed, his expression colder than the rain hammering the windows behind him. "You have already caused enough disruption for one evening." Maya felt heat rise in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. Panic never helped anyone breathe easier. "What did he eat?" she asked quickly. "Did the dessert have walnuts?" Richard's irritation flashed instantly. "What difference does that make?" Because his throat is closing. The room fell quieter this time. Not silent. Uneasy. One investor slowly lowered his fork onto his plate. Another guest glanced nervously toward Noah, who was now coughing harder into his sleeve. Richard's assistant stepped forward awkwardly. Sir, I think the chef mentioned imported walnut cream in the chocolate souffle. Maya's stomach dropped. Does Noah have a nut allergy? She asked. Richard finally hesitated. Just for half a second. Mild, he answered sharply. He has never reacted like this before. Maya looked directly at him. Allergies can change without warning. Noah suddenly pushed his chair back with a scraping sound that cut across the ballroom. His breathing came faster now, short, frightened gasps that sounded too small inside such a massive room. Dad, he whispered weakly. Richard turned immediately, but for the first time that night, confidence disappeared from his face. Noah. The boy tried to stand, but his knees buckled awkwardly against the chair. Several guests gasped. One woman covered her mouth with trembling fingers. Maya stepped around the guard before anyone could stop her and knelt beside Noah. Stay with me, sweetheart, she said softly. Look at me. Noah's watery eyes locked onto hers instantly. Fear sat inside them like a storm. Maya remembered those same eyes from years earlier inside crowded emergency waiting rooms while sitting beside her mother under flickering fluorescent lights. Fear always looked the same on children. Small, confused, silent. Can you breathe through your nose for me? She whispered gently. Noah tried, but the sound that came out was strained and tight. Maya looked up sharply. Call 911 right now. Nobody moved. The ballroom remained frozen beneath the warm gold lighting and the distant sound of thunder outside. Richard stared down at his son as if his mind could not catch up to what was happening in front of him. Then Noah's body suddenly leaned sideways. A crystal plate slid from the table and shattered beside him as the child collapsed against Maya's shoulder. The entire room erupted at once. For one terrible second, nobody seemed to know what to do. The ballroom that had been full of laughter and clinking champagne glasses only moments earlier now felt hollow and frozen beneath the chandelier light. Noah's small body leaned weakly against Maya, while his breathing turned thin and strained against her shoulder. Call an ambulance now. Maya shouted again, louder this time. Her voice finally broke the paralysis gripping the room. Guests stumbled backward from the table. Someone dropped a silver fork. One woman began fumbling for her phone with shaking hands while another whispered, "Oh my God," under her breath. Richard Hale rushed forward at last, panic cracking through the cold composure he had carried all evening. Noah, he said sharply, kneeling beside his son. Look at me, buddy. But Noah could barely respond. His tiny chest struggled for each breath now. Maya gently lifted the boy's chin, trying to keep his airway open while her own heartbeat thundered in her ears. He needs epinephrine immediately, she said. Where is his emergency injector? Richard looked stunned. Truly stunned. Not angry anymore. Not powerful. Just terrified. I do not know, he admitted quietly. Maya stared at him in disbelief for half a second before turning toward the terrified staff gathered near the walls. Check his backpack. Check the kitchen. Check everywhere. The household exploded into frantic movement. Servers rushed through the ballroom doors. One security guard sprinted upstairs while another shouted directions into his radio. Rain pounded violently against the mansion windows overlooking the dark coastline below. Lightning flashed across the ocean cliffs, turning the entire room silver for an instant. Noah coughed weakly again. Maya could hear the tightening in his throat now. Less air. Less time. Richard's hands trembled as he brushed damp hair away from his son's forehead. Please, he whispered under his breath, almost too quietly to hear. Maya glanced at him. The billionaire who had humiliated her in front of an entire ballroom looked completely helpless now kneeling on the marble floor beside his child. Fear had stripped everything else away. Noah, Maya said softly, keeping her voice calm for the boy. Stay with me, sweetheart. Keep looking at me. Noah's watery eyes fluttered toward her again. Small. Fingers grabbed weakly at her sleeve. Miss Maya, he rasped painfully. Her chest tightened instantly. I am right here. Suddenly, an older housekeeper rushed back into the room, holding a small blue medical pouch. Found it, she cried breathlessly. Maya grabbed the injector immediately and checked the label with fast, steady hands. Expired. 3 months expired. Her stomach dropped. Richard saw the look on her face and went pale. What does that mean? Maya looked at Noah struggling for air beside her and made a decision in less than a second. She reached into the pocket of her uniform apron with trembling fingers and pulled out a second injector wrapped in clear plastic. Richard blinked in confusion. "Why do you have one?" Maya did not answer right away. She was already removing the safety cap carefully. "My younger brother had severe allergies," she said quietly. "I learned never to go anywhere without one." The room fell silent again as Maya steadied her hands over Noah's tiny arm while thunder rolled across the dark sky outside the mansion. Maya pressed the injector carefully against Noah's arm and activated it with one steady movement. The ballroom stayed frozen around them. Nobody spoke. Nobody moved. Even the storm outside seemed distant beneath the sound of the little boy struggling to breathe against her shoulder. Richard watched with pale, exhausted eyes, his expensive tuxedo wrinkled now from kneeling on the marble floor. "Will it work?" he asked quietly. The sharp edge in his voice was gone completely. Maya kept her attention on Noah. "It should help open his airway within a minute or two." She spoke calmly, but inside her chest fear twisted tightly with every shallow breath the child took. 1 minute could feel very long when someone could not breathe. Maya brushed Noah's damp hair gently away from his forehead. "Stay with me, sweetheart," she whispered again. "You are doing so good." Noah's small fingers still clung weakly to her sleeve. Around them, wealthy guests stood silently beneath the gold chandelier light, watching the woman they had barely noticed all evening become the only calm person in the room. Somewhere near the back of the ballroom, a wine glass tipped over and rolled slowly across the floor before settling into silence. Richard lowered his head briefly, pressing one shaking hand against his mouth. Maya saw it then. The guilt, heavy and sudden. The realization of how quickly everything had almost disappeared. A minute earlier, he had been worried about embarrassment in front of investors. Now none of that seemed to matter anymore. "Sir," one of the security guards said softly from behind him, "the ambulance is 6 minutes away." 6 minutes. Maya inhaled carefully. Noah's breathing still sounded tight, but not as sharp as before. The terrible wheezing inside his throat had softened slightly. "That is good," she said quietly. "Come on, Noah. Keep breathing with me." The little boy blinked slowly at her, frightened tears gathering in the corners of his eyes. "Am I dying?" he whispered weakly. Richard's face broke instantly. "No," he said too fast. "No, absolutely not." But the fear in his voice betrayed him. Maya leaned closer to Noah, keeping her tone warm and steady. "You are not dying, sweetheart. Your body is just having a hard time right now. But we are helping it." Noah stared at her for another moment before giving the smallest nod. Richard looked at Maya then, really looked at her for perhaps the first time since she started working at the estate 3 months earlier. Not as staff, not as background, not as someone carrying trays through silent hallways. He saw the steadiness in her hands, the calm in her voice, the way Noah trusted her without hesitation. "How did you know?" Richard asked quietly. Maya did not answer immediately. Her eyes stayed on Noah's breathing. "My brother almost died from an allergic reaction when he was 7, she said softly. "I learned the signs the hard way." The ballroom remained still beneath the soft glow of chandeliers while rain streaked endlessly down the towering windows overlooking the dark Atlantic coast. Richard swallowed hard. "And I fired you for trying to help him." Maya finally looked up at him. There was no anger in her expression, only exhaustion. "Right now," she said gently, "your son needs you focused on him. Nothing else." The words landed harder than any accusation could have. Richard lowered his eyes immediately. Across the room, several guests exchanged silent glances. A billionaire surrounded by wealth, power, and influence had nearly lost the most important thing in his life because the only person who noticed the danger was the maid everyone ignored. The sound of sirens finally cut through the storm outside like a lifeline. Red and blue lights flashed across the massive ballroom windows, reflecting over crystal glasses, silver trays, and frightened faces that had gone pale with shock. Noah's breathing had started to steady slightly against Maya's shoulder, but she could still hear the weakness in every inhale. Too shallow, too fragile. Paramedics rushed through the mansion doors carrying medical bags and equipment while soaked rainwater dripped from their jackets onto the marble floor. 8-year-old male, Maya said immediately, calm and precise. Severe allergic reaction likely caused by walnuts. Epinephrine administered approximately 4 minutes ago. One of the paramedics nodded quickly while kneeling beside Noah. Good call. Richard stepped back automatically as the medical team surrounded his son. For the first time in years, maybe decades, the billionaire looked completely powerless inside his own home. His expensive ballroom, his investors, his million-dollar charity event, none of it could protect the child lying weakly on the floor. One paramedic checked Noah's breathing while another attached a small oxygen mask over his face. The little boy's frightened eyes searched the room until they landed on Maya again. Only then did some of the panic leave his expression. "Miss Maya," he whispered weakly beneath the mask. Maya leaned closer immediately. "I am still here." Noah's small fingers reached toward her instinctively. Richard noticed it. Everyone noticed it. The child trusted her more than anyone else in the room. One of the older investors slowly removed his glasses and looked away, uncomfortable with what the moment revealed about all of them. The paramedic glanced up after checking Noah's pulse again. "You saved his life," he said plainly. "Another few minutes. Without treatment could have turned very serious." The words settled heavily over the ballroom. Nobody spoke afterward. The only sounds came from the storm outside and the soft hiss of oxygen through Noah's mask. Richard stared at Maya as if he could not fully process what he was hearing. His face had lost all color beneath the chandelier light. "You are sure?" he asked quietly. The paramedic looked surprised by the question. "Absolutely." Whoever recognized the reaction that quickly knew exactly what they were doing. Richard's eyes shifted slowly toward the expired injector still lying near the shattered glass on the floor. 3 months expired. His jaw tightened painfully. Maya stood carefully now, exhaustion beginning to creep into her arms and shoulders. Adrenaline had carried her through the last several minutes, but now the weight of everything started settling over her all at once. The humiliation, the fear, the memory of Richard ordering security to remove her while Noah struggled to breathe beside her. One of the house staff quietly handed Maya a towel for the rainwater and broken glass dust clinging to her uniform. "Thank you," she whispered softly. Richard suddenly stepped forward. "Maya," his voice caught slightly. She looked at him calmly, waiting. For a moment the billionaire seemed unable to find words. His eyes moved toward his son lying safely beneath warm blankets and oxygen tubing. Then back to the woman he had publicly humiliated less than 15 minutes earlier. "I was wrong," he said quietly. The confession barely rose above the storm outside, but in the silence of the ballroom it felt louder than anything else that night. Maya lowered her eyes briefly. "Your son is safe," she answered gently. "That is what matters." But Richard knew better now, because the room had witnessed everything. They had watched him dismiss her, ignore her, shame her, and then depend entirely on her when his world began falling apart. Across the ballroom, the guests who once looked through Maya Brooks like she was invisible no longer looked at her the same way at all. An hour later, the mansion no longer sounded like a charity gala. The music was gone. The investors had quietly left one by one beneath black umbrellas and flashing rain outside the front entrance. Staff moved silently through the ballroom collecting broken glass and half-finished wine glasses while thunder rolled farther away over the ocean. The enormous house felt colder now. Honest somehow. Maya stood alone near the service hallway, twisting the damp towel slowly between her hands. Her cleaning uniform still carried faint stains from spilled water and medicine, and exhaustion sat heavily beneath her eyes. She should have gone home already. Most people would have. But part of her could not leave until she knew Noah was completely safe upstairs. Footsteps echoed softly across the marble floor behind her. Richard Hale stopped several feet away, no longer looking like the untouchable billionaire from earlier that evening. His tuxedo tie hung loose around his collar now, and there was something unusually human in the tiredness beneath his eyes. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Rainwater slid slowly down the tall windows beside them, while distant lightning flickered softly beyond the cliffs. "He is stable," Richard said at last, his voice low. "The doctors said he will be all right." Maya exhaled quietly, without realizing she had been holding her breath. "That is good." Richard nodded once, but he did not leave. He looked around the nearly empty ballroom instead. The shattered elegance of the evening still lingered everywhere. Crumpled napkins, melted ice sculptures, forgotten champagne glasses glowing beneath dim chandelier light. "I spent 15 years building this life," he said quietly. "The business, the reputation, the image." Maya listened silently. Tonight, I almost lost the only thing that actually mattered. His voice cracked slightly on the final word before he looked away toward the dark windows. Maya lowered her eyes gently. She understood that kind of fear more than she wished she did. When my mother got sick, she said softly, I used to sit beside her hospital bed every night listening to the machines breathe for her. Richard glanced toward her. I kept thinking if I worked harder or prayed harder or stayed awake longer, maybe I could keep her here. The ballroom remained still except for the distant rumble of rain outside. But some moments change you forever no matter how much money or strength you have. Richard swallowed hard. Maya could see the weight settling deeper across his face now. Not pride anymore. Regret. Real regret. I humiliated you tonight, he admitted quietly, in front of everyone. Maya did not rush to answer. She stared at the polished marble floor where broken crystal had sparkled beneath the lights earlier that evening. People usually see the uniform first, she said gently, not the person wearing it. Richard closed his eyes briefly at the words. Because he knew she was right. He had seen her carrying trays through hallways for months without ever asking who she was, what she knew, or what she had survived before arriving in his mansion. To him, she had simply been staff. Replaceable. Invisible. Until the moment his son reached for her instead of him. Upstairs somewhere deep inside the estate, a child laughed softly through the quiet hallway. Small. Weak. Alive. Richard looked toward the sound immediately. Maya noticed how quickly his expression softened at hearing it. Then he turned back toward her, his voice quieter than before. Why did you stay? Maya blinked slightly. After I fired you. After everything. She looked toward the rain sliding down the towering windows beside them. Because Noah was scared, she answered softly. And children should never feel alone when they are scared. The words settled into the silence between them like truth too heavy to ignore. The mansion grew quieter after midnight. Most of the downstairs lights had been dimmed, leaving long golden reflections across the marble floors and silent hallways. Outside, the storm had finally weakened into soft rain drifting across the ocean cliffs below the estate. Maya stood near the back staircase, gathering her small belongings into a worn canvas bag. Her shift had technically ended hours ago, but time inside the house had felt strange after everything that happened. She folded the damp towel carefully and placed it beside her extra shoes while the distant ticking of a grandfather clock echoed through the hallway. For the first time all night, exhaustion settled fully into her body. Her hands still trembled slightly from adrenaline. She only wanted to go home now, take off the soaked uniform, and sit quietly in the small apartment she rented across town. You are leaving? Maya turned gently at the sound of Noah's voice. The little boy stood several feet away at the end of the hallway wrapped in a navy blanket, his oxygen tube gone now. Richard stood behind him with one hand resting protectively against his shoulder. Maya's face softened immediately. You should be upstairs resting, she said quietly. Noah shrugged slightly beneath the blanket. I wanted to say thank you before you left. Maya smiled faintly. You do not have to thank me. Yes, I do. His small voice carried surprising certainty. You saved me. Richard remained silent beside his son, but Maya noticed the way his expression tightened hearing the words spoken so simply. Children had a way of stripping truth down to its purest form. Noah walked closer slowly. I was really scared, he admitted softly. I know, Maya answered gently. But you were very brave. Noah looked down at the blanket wrapped around his shoulders. When I could not breathe, everybody looked scared. But you did not. Maya knelt slightly so she could meet his eyes. Sometimes when people are frightened, they need someone else to stay calm for them. Noah thought about that carefully. Then after a moment, he stepped forward and hugged her quietly. The hallway fell completely still. Maya closed her eyes briefly, resting one hand gently against the boy's back. Richard watched the moment in silence beneath the warm hallway lights. Something inside him seemed to break all over again. Because his son trusted this woman completely after only a few months of knowing her. Trusted her more deeply than many people Richard had paid millions to stand beside their family over the years. Noah finally stepped back. Will you still work here? He asked softly. The question hung heavily in the hallway. Maya hesitated for the first time all evening. Before she could answer, Richard spoke quietly behind him. That decision should be hers. Noah looked confused. But this is your house. Richard lowered his eyes briefly. Yes, he said softly. But I do not get to decide everything for everyone. Maya looked at him carefully after hearing that. The billionaire from earlier that evening would never have said words like that. Noah glanced between them uncertainly. I do not want you to leave, he whispered to Maya. She brushed a hand gently across his curls. Sometimes adults need time to figure things out. Richard inhaled slowly. Maya, she looked up. For several seconds, he seemed unable to find the right words again. Then finally, he said the one thing she never expected to hear from him. I judged you before I ever knew you. The hallway remained silent except for rain tapping softly against distant windows. Richard swallowed hard. And tonight my son is alive because you chose kindness anyway. Maya looked at Noah standing quietly between them beneath the soft golden light. Then she looked back at Richard. Children notice who makes them feel safe, she said gently, even when adults are too distracted to see it. Richard lowered his head slowly because deep down he knew she was right. The next morning, sunlight spilled softly across the Hale estate as if the storm had never happened at all. The ocean beyond the cliffs shimmered pale silver beneath the early sky, and the massive mansion stood quiet in the cold morning air. Downstairs, staff moved carefully through the dining room, resetting crystal glasses and replacing floral arrangements from the ruined gala the night before. But something inside the house had changed. People spoke more softly now, more carefully, like everyone had witnessed something they could not fully forget. Maya stepped through the front entrance carrying her canvas bag against her shoulder. She had returned only to collect the few personal items she kept in the staff locker room before leaving for good. At least that was what she told herself during the drive over. She wore plain jeans and a gray sweater now instead of her uniform, and without the black housekeeping dress, she somehow looked younger. Lighter. The butler, near the staircase, noticed her immediately. Miss Brooks, he said gently, almost relieved to see her. Maya offered a polite smile. I only came for my things. The older man hesitated before answering. Mr. Hale asked if you would speak with him before you leave. Maya lowered her eyes briefly. Part of her wanted to refuse. Another part remembered Noah's frightened face the night before. All right, she said quietly. The study upstairs smelled faintly of coffee and rain-soaked cedar from the open balcony doors. Richard stood near the windows overlooking the ocean, one hand resting against the dark wooden desk behind him. He looked like he had not slept at all. His white shirt sleeves were rolled unevenly at the wrists, and faint shadows sat beneath his eyes. When Maya stepped inside, he turned immediately. Thank you for coming. Maya remained near the doorway. The butler said you wanted to speak with me. Richard nodded once, but for several seconds he seemed unsure where to begin. The silence stretched quietly between them while waves crashed softly against the cliffs outside. Finally, he reached into a folder resting on the desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. This is your formal reinstatement, he said carefully, with a salary increase, full benefits, paid medical coverage, anything you need. Maya looked at the paper but did not move toward it. Richard swallowed hard. I know money does not erase what happened last night. His voice remained low and honest now, but I want to make this right. Maya studied him carefully beneath the soft morning light. Do you know what hurt the most? She asked quietly. Richard's expression tightened. The firing. Maya shook her head gently. No. She looked toward the ocean beyond the windows. It was how quickly everyone believed I did not belong in that room the moment I spoke. The words settled heavily inside the study. Richard lowered his eyes slowly because he knew exactly what she meant. The investors, the guests, even him. The moment she interrupted dinner, they stopped seeing concern and only saw a maid stepping beyond her place. I spent most of my life proving I was capable, Maya continued softly. But sometimes people decide who you are before you ever open your mouth. Richard stood completely still listening to her. No defense, no excuses, just listening. I failed you, he admitted quietly. Not only as your employer, as a person. Maya looked at him for a long moment. Then finally she stepped closer to the desk and gently pushed the reinstatement papers back toward him. Richard blinked in surprise. You do not want to come back? Maya smiled sadly. Noah deserves people around him who truly see him. And maybe after last night, you finally will. Richard's face tightened slightly at the truth inside her words. Then Maya reached into her canvas bag and pulled out a small emergency injector still sealed in plastic. She placed it gently on the desk between them. Keep this close to him, she said softly. Just in case. Richard stared down at the injector silently while sunlight spilled across the desk between them like something fragile finally breaking open. 3 weeks later, the Hale estate looked different in ways most people would never notice. The ballroom chandeliers still glittered above polished marble floors. The ocean still crashed against the cliffs below the mansion every evening. Expensive cars still rolled through the front gates beneath tall iron lanterns. But the silence inside the house no longer felt cold. Staff were no longer afraid to speak above whispers. Laughter occasionally drifted from the kitchen downstairs. Even the security guards smiled now when Noah raced through the hallways with socks sliding across the polished floors. Some wounds changed a house forever. Late afternoon sunlight poured through the massive windows of Richard Hale's office while he sat quietly behind his desk reviewing paperwork he had ignored for days. His phone buzzed constantly with business calls and investor meetings, but his attention kept drifting toward the framed drawing sitting beside his laptop. It showed a small stick figure boy holding hands with a taller woman wearing a dark dress. Above them, written in uneven child handwriting, were the words, "Miss Maya, help me breathe." Richard stared at the drawing silently before leaning back in his chair. For years he had believed success meant control. Control of business. Control of image. Control of emotions. But one terrifying night had exposed how fragile all of it truly was. A soft knock interrupted the quiet room. "Dad." Noah peeked inside wearing jeans and a navy sweatshirt, his curls slightly messy from playing outside near the garden cliffs. Richard's face softened immediately. "Hey, buddy." Noah stepped inside, carrying something folded carefully in both hands. "Can we go now?" he asked. Richard glanced toward the clock and smiled faintly. "We are early." "I know." Noah grinned slightly. "But I do not want to be late." 20 minutes later, the black SUV rolled slowly through downtown streets glowing gold beneath the setting sun. Rain from the storm weeks earlier had long disappeared, leaving the city washed clean beneath cool autumn light. Noah sat quietly in the back seat beside Richard, holding the folded paper carefully against his chest the entire drive. Finally, the car stopped in front of a small brick building beside a corner pharmacy and laundromat. Maya stepped outside at that exact moment, carrying grocery bags against her hip. She froze slightly seeing the SUV parked beside the curb. Richard stepped out first while Noah hurried around the other side before the driver could even open his door. "Miss Maya." Noah ran toward her smiling. Maya's tired face softened instantly. "Hey there, sweetheart." Noah hugged her tightly before holding out the folded paper proudly. "I made something for you at school." Maya carefully unfolded the paper while Richard stood several feet away, watching quietly beneath the soft glow of the streetlights. The drawing showed a little boy standing beside a woman beneath giant storm clouds. But above them, the clouds had opened into sunlight. At the bottom, Noah had written slowly in careful, uneven letters, "Thank you for hearing me when nobody else did." Maya's eyes lingered on the words for a long moment. Then she knelt slightly and pulled Noah gently into another hug. Richard watched silently from the sidewalk, hands resting inside his coat pockets while evening wind moved softly through the city streets around them. He realized then that kindness did not always arrive loudly. Sometimes it arrived wearing a cleaning uniform. Sometimes it stood quietly in the corner while everyone important looked the other way. And sometimes the person the world treated as invisible turned out to be the one holding everything together. Maya finally looked up toward Richard beneath the warm city lights. Neither of them spoke. They did not need to. Noah smiled between them while traffic moved softly in the distance and sunlight faded slowly beyond the rooftops. For the first time in a very long time, the silence between them no longer felt empty.
It's okay now. Everything is gonna be okay.